Good evening and welcome. My name is Ian Tang. I'm the president of Turning Point USA chapter here at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Before we delve into the most exciting part of this evening with our speaker, I'd first like to thank the Student Org Development and Administration Office and the Illini Union for their commitment to free speech on campus and for providing this venue. I'd like to thank the Leadership Institute for its unwavering commitment to fostering strong, independent, conservative clubs on college campuses. I would also like to thank other conservative RSOs on campus for their support of tonight's event. The Illini Republicans, Young Americans for Freedom, Network of Enlightened Women, and Young Americans for Solidarity. I would like to give a special shout out to the Young Americans for Solidarity for their special support in getting our speaker tonight, and they have a table at the back if you would like to know more about their RSO. Lastly, I'd like to thank Turning Point USA National for all of the resources they have provided to make the event tonight possible. Turning Point USA is the biggest political organization in the country and is the flagship of the conservative movement on American college campuses today. For over a decade, Turning Point USA has been dedicated to promoting conservative principles of freedom, free market, and unlimited government on college campuses. For those interested in advancing the conservative movement at the University of Illinois, I encourage you to talk to one of the event staff or follow us on Instagram at Illini_TPUSA. While Turning Point wholeheartedly welcomes open dialogue and respectful debates, I want to remind all of you that disruptive behaviors of any sort will not be tolerated. For those who may disagree with our speaker's ideas tonight, we will have a Q&A session after the speech. Without further ado, it is my distinct honor to introduce our speaker tonight, Dr. Chet C. Pecknold. Dr. Pecknold is a Catholic theologian who teaches in the School of Theology at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Since 2022, he has been named by the Catholic Herald as one of the most influential Catholic thought leaders and authors in the United States. An internationally recognized scholar of the Augustine theological and political thought, Pecknold has authored or edited 5 books, including Christianity and Politics, A Brief Guide to the History, and the T.N.T. Clark Companion to Augustine and Modern Theology, and authored dozens of peer-reviewed journal articles. He edits the Sacred Doctrina series of CUA Press with Father Thomas Joseph White, and is co-founder and editor of the influential Substack, Post-Liberal Order. Tonight, his speech titled, Can America Be Saved? The Promises and Pearls of Post-Liberal Politics in America. Please give your most welcoming round of applause for our speaker tonight, Dr. Chet Pecknold.
Thank you very much. It's a really great honor to be here at the University of Illinois and to be here at as a guest of TPUSA, indeed a great active principle on many college campuses for conservative ideas. I was originally asked to talk about post-liberalism generally. J.D. Vance is the vice presidential candidate in the GOP, and he has said I'm on the post-liberal right, and I'm associated with post-liberalism, and so I think I was asked for that reason. But I said, well, how about a more broad title like Can America Be Saved? Can America Be Saved, I think, is actually a question that many Americans are thinking about, regardless of their political affiliations, whether they're Democrats or Republicans or neither. We feel like we're in trouble. And I think there's good reason for why we think that we're in trouble. And I want to talk both about what post-liberalism is and whether or not what post-liberalism is means that we can save America. And so I'm going to ask first about definitions. What is post-liberalism? What is post-liberal politics? What does it mean for someone like J.D. Vance to say he's on the post-liberal right? And then I'm going to talk about the question, the very question of can America be saved? And then in my third part of my talk, I'm going to talk about an answer to the question. Okay, what is post-liberalism? Journalists love to use the term today to describe some nefarious intellectual influence upon certain politicians. But that's not how the term came into use If you know how to use Google Books Ngram, you can see for yourself that the term post-liberal begins to be used in the 1980s, just as the Reagan Revolution is beginning to wrest power away from Democrats. But this political context is entirely coincidental to how the term was first used. I wrote my doctoral dissertation at Cambridge University in England on the work of a Yale theologian named George Lindbeck, whose most famous work announced in 1985 that we are now living in a post-liberal age. 1985 is a long time ago. But this was a philosophical claim rather than a political claim. So I want to talk about the philosophical priors to the political claim. George Lindbeck believed, rightly in my view, that all the liberal philosophies which followed Immanuel Kant had been superseded by a broad range of post-liberal, that is, post-Kantian, philosophical challenges to liberalism, from Nietzsche to Wittgenstein to Foucault to Alasdair MacIntyre. Lindbeck's argument was complex and not germane to our discussion tonight, except to say that he sought to show how the influence of the liberal view of religion, not politics, as individual sentiment and feeling was giving way to more objective understandings of religion as how a community uses words, how a community acts towards its ends over time. That philosophical shift that Lindbeck was interested in, he called post-liberal. It was a shift away from making the individual the fundamental unit for political and religious thought to thinking about the community as central, the most basic framework for understanding. In our political discussions today, we see something of the tension between the priority of the individual versus the community. We've witnessed this for many decades. What looks like a kind of paradox of the one and the many. And we see this on both sides of the aisle. While we think of the left as socialist, and they are, in practice, it's still the politics of my body, my choice, of sexual or biological self-determination, and rebellion against the natural law, in my view, as well as rebellion against the author of that law. Similarly, conservatives are associated with preservation of community, church, tradition, family, and now that really bad word, nationalism. Yet in practice, it's still, conservative politics is still the politics of what? Individual liberty, unfettered markets, resistance to the use of governmental power to aid community, church, tradition, family. This, however, is only an apparent paradox. It's not a paradox because it is actually resolvable. Liberalism has been operative on both the left and the right politically from the very beginning. Liberals base their views upon the primacy of the individual. Whether they are liberals on the right, individual liberty, or whether they are liberals on the left, my body, my choice. In 1985, Lindbeck thought the ground was shifting away from liberalism in philosophy and religion and towards a more fundamental realignment around the community. I think that what we have witnessed politically over the last 8 years, from 2016 to 2024, is something like the birth pangs of political post-liberalism. And it shares some similarities to the early philosophical shifts. While the term had been in philosophical and religious circulation, it now has emerged on the global stage as descriptively useful. And this leads me to offer a few tentative points which should belong to any decent definition of post-liberal politics. The first thing I want to say about what post-liberal politics is that it is something negative, not in the way you might think. Post-liberal politics is nothing other than the recognition that while liberalism has been enormously successful at dominating the world, you can even talk about liberalism as an empire, the principles are no longer operative. Let me explain. The principles of liberalism are no longer working for people. Peak liberalism is now wildly destructive. We see the carnage all around us. People are unhappy. They are at one another's throats, not just online, but in the streets. People are unhappy and they're searching for competing alternatives to liberalism on both the left and the right. This is something we see happening not just in America, but all over the world. And people are nervous about that. They're nervous about both challenges from the left and the right post-liberals. Post-liberal politics, we can say, is not really something constructive in itself, but is simply the recognition that liberalism is failing us, and people feel it. They feel that liberalism has failed to secure the goods of human happiness, the goods of human community, the goods of human flourishing. So that first point is that post-liberal politics is really something negative. It's the absence of a workable political philosophy. This is, in my view, a politically realistic recognition. It's not projection. It's not wish fulfillment. It's not, I hope we're not liberal anymore. It's that liberalism isn't really operative as a set of principles. Post-liberal, in this sense, simply names a felt response to the failure of liberalism to secure genuine goods for people, who are by nature made for relation, made for communion, made for a better kind of political community than we have. We long for a better society. We long for something, as I do every night when my oldest son is at UVA, but my other 4 children still need to get tucked in to bed at night, and I think, what kind of country will they inherit? And I don't have good feelings about that often. But that itself is something that we all long to do. We long to build a society that we can be proud to pass that on to our children. We must say that our baseline understanding for what post-liberalism then is principally descriptive. Post-liberalism is a descriptive term. By virtue of its very construction as coming after liberalism, post-liberalism can't include any one definitive account of a prescriptive politics. Put differently, while our definition of post-liberal can have descriptive power across a range of differing accounts of what would be politically good to us, you might have one descriptive account, one prescriptive account of what would be good for America, and I might have another one. But post-liberal doesn't fundamentally work this way. Post-liberalism cannot be defined as Christian nationalist, it cannot be defined as theocratic, it cannot be defined as reactionary, or any of the Second World War parade of horrible epithets that we throw around as if they have power in the wake of enraged existence that Donald Trump is the candidate. Post-liberalism cannot be called any of those things because it simply cannot be any of those things. The baseline understanding of post-liberal is descriptive, not prescriptive. This is part of its promise, I think, is that it acknowledges the failure of liberalism. It acknowledges that we have some ground-level shifts to take into account. The flip side of this descriptive understanding of post-liberal politics is that it permits, then, a wide range of constructive political projects that are not liberal. This makes many people nervous. It contains both promise and peril. The overtly religious turn of the so-called woke left, for example, is a post-liberal movement. That's post-liberal. The more Nietzschean approaches of the alt-right, right, the strong man, that is post-liberal. The rise of Christian nationalism is post-liberal in a sense. The longing for pre-liberal conceptions of political flourishing, which acknowledge Christianity, is post-liberal. These are all, I would say, evidence of a post-liberal turn, rather than each of those things being constitutively post-liberal. Post-liberalism lets 1,000 flowers, non-liberal flowers, bloom. Catholic post-liberals like myself will make their proposals Catholic. Nietzschean post-liberals will make their proposals Nietzschean, and so on. The collapse of liberalism is precisely the collapse of neutrality. There is no longer the myth, the ignoble lie, that we can stand and have a position of neutrality with respect to our ultimate values, our religion. collapse of liberalism is the collapse of a fake neutrality. This is good because neutrality was always a lie. Liberalism was never actually neutral. The rise of alternative ways of thinking about how we order our lives together is evidence of the post-liberal moment in the world. Liberalism is not the future. All the constructive proposals that can be called post-liberal, in the sense that they are only really, can only be called post-liberal in the sense that they're only really thinkable, because the human mind despises a vacuum. We don't like, actually, to say that there's no overarching political philosophy that governs our lives. There's a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. The human mind despises a vacuum, and the void left by the collapse of liberalism is part of our frisson over what post-liberal politics can be or is. It's what gives all of these proposals their frisson. They would just be fringe things. All those things would be fringe things if liberalism still had real objective power in ordering our lives. By now it should be clear, I don't actually think post-liberalism is inherently anything other than a flight from liberalism. It does, however, clear the way for political contestation. Political contestations which are non-liberal contestations. This has both promise and peril within it. The promise is that we might find a politics which is truly better for us than liberalism. That would be good, because liberalism hasn't been good for us. The peril is that literally anything is possible, even the bad stuff, including post-liberal futures which could be no less tyrannical than our liberal present. This should sober the more intelligent in our midst to stop throwing the epithets about. Stop throwing about those Second World War parade of horrible terms and start thinking about political realities on the ground. The world is changing. Liberalism is no longer a set of operative governing principles which the world lives by. The second part of my talk is about this question, then, which I think is on our minds. The question of whether America can be saved. Can America be saved? That's a question that's fraught with theological frisson itself, especially when a theologian tries to answer the question. But allow me first to observe that this question is being asked by both the left and the right. Both the left and the right care about this country. They care about whether or not America can be saved. It's not a strange or foreign question to anybody. It's the presupposition of every political campaign now, isn't it? Isn't every political campaign now about the salvation of America? It's a question that not just America asks, but other countries ask. Hungary asks, China asks, Russia asks this question. America, of course, is accustomed to the question on some level. America was founded with almost messianic ambitions for itself, and arguably became the first truly global empire within the relatively short span of 200 years, not least because it understood itself as a city on a hill, a theological ideal, a messianic political idea. But now we feel that our American empire is crumbling. Geopolitically, we now have serious competitors. Internally, we feel our collapse acutely in our cities, which are at once the wealthiest cities in the world and filled with disorder. With a hopelessly sedated and impoverished population occupying its underpaths and walkways, which city officials nervously try to cover up when foreign heads of state come to visit. This is not the behavior of a confident, flourishing republic. Our school systems are failing our kids at astonishing rates. Young people are no longer getting married or forming stable families, producing the next generation, not least because they have no political hope for their future or for the future generations they might conceive. The workplace has been sterilized by new terrifying rules of compliance, to norms imposed from above, and an enforcement procedure bound up with the culture of cancellation. The post-COVID rise of remote work provides an added layer of anxiety about everything from traffic patterns to social isolation and alienation. Antidepressants are now prescribed at alarming rates. Suicide is now spoken of euphemistically as death with dignity. We speak incessantly of human dignity, yet cannot seem to create a world which dignifies us. We cannot seem to create a world which actually elevates people. Our partisan politics is now so fierce that people shrug their shoulders at assassination attempts as simply part of the bargain. The friend-enemy distinction is no longer an insight into the exercise of power, but is now a desiderata for all political commerce. Homes are now more likely to fly the progress flag than the American one. Even U.S. embassies abroad have taken to flying flags which don't belong to the country they represent. What we project around the world is the feeling that we are not a nation at war with communism or fascism. We're not a nation at war with Russia or China. What we project around the world is that we are a nation at war with ourselves. The question of whether America can be saved is now the elephant in the room for all Americans. Whether our slogan is "Make America Great Again" or "We're not going back," there is a palpable sense that our politics are messianic in a way both consonant and dissonant with our nation's founding messianic tendencies. We have always been, in Ernst Lee Trubison's terms, a redeemer nation. America is for the pilgrims something like Jerusalem, aligned with the heavenly city of God, a city on a hill, as I say. Our messianic sense of ourselves even precedes the constitutional founding, as the Spanish, French, and British crowns each respectively thought about the new world, as a world in which the Christian religious vision would find a kind of political and social renaissance in a new land. But now, we are at war not with an old world or another world, but with ourselves. Our question now is, what will save us from us? What will save us from a corrupt demos? What will save us from crumbling cities? What will save us from the fruits of liberalism? We want salvation from the neo-Marxists, or we want salvation from the neo-fascists, or we want salvation from Christian nationalists, or theocrats, or from would-be dictators, some of whom can rig elections and others who can't. We really are in a kind of cold civil war with ourselves in such a profound way. There are even civil wars within parties. Internecine disputes where people with a putatively common aim destroy one another over competing views over how to save America. The very question, can America be saved then, is necessarily the post-liberal one. It presupposes that liberal democracy has failed to make, in neutral NPR voice tone, a free, just, and more verdant world. Of course, the question is political, but not solely political, that we're asking when we ask, can America be saved? The ancients didn't ask this question. They didn't ask, can Rome be saved? Things like that. Christians asked that. But the pagans didn't. Thinkers like Cicero would articulate the essential question, the pre-Christian question of political decline this way. The pagan would say, is Rome still a res publica? That is to say, the pagan political thinker would ask a definitional question. Are we still what we say we are? We're a republic. Are we still a res publica? Ancients facing decline would ask the definitional question first. Are we what we say we are? Are we a commonwealth? Do we have a common morality? Do we have a common morality in America? What do you think? Cicero thinks if you don't have a common morality, you don't have a common wealth, right? Do we have shared ends as a political community? Do you think we do? Cicero thinks if you don't have shared ends, it's a political community. You're not a commonwealth. You're not a political community. If not, what are we then? Those are the pagan questions. Superb questions, I think. Questions we should ask ourselves. What are we to be saved? Now, the question, can America be saved, isn't a pagan question. I do think it's a kind of post-liberal question, but I think most fundamentally, it's a Christian question. It's a question forged, at least in the Christian dispensation of time, as the Roman Empire was crumbling and Christianity was becoming the dominant religion. The question of whether Rome could be saved was the Christian question. Could it be redeemed somehow? The eventual answer was the Holy Roman Empire, whatever you think of that. But the way of asking and answering the question is writ into our history too. It's writ into the very notion of being a Redeemer nation. But now we are that Redeemer nation at war with ourselves, and it almost doesn't matter whether we think the problem comes from our founding or whether we think the problem comes at some later inflection point. The point is that we all now recognize that America does indeed need saving, however we got into the mess that we're in. Whether on the left or the right, this is the question which captivates us. Apart from a few conservative intellectuals who believe the true principles of classical liberalism will save us, if you think that our salvation will come from something like liberal democracy, no one thinks that the Washington Post, with their self-aggrandizing and blatantly partisan democracy dies in darkness, is holding the line for our freedom. And thus enter this array of competing post-liberal, non-liberal visions, each rhetorically at war with each other in some respect. Even the old-school liberals of both parties have to adapt their views to post-liberal accounts of liberal failure in this or that respect. They have to come into some compromise with a recognition that liberalism has failed to secure a common good, a common flag. It has to take into account the negative corollaries. Our desire for stronger borders, for better standards for immigration, or for a family policy that deals with birth dearth. These are all trailing indicators of a recognition that liberalism has failed. We need a better way of governing. It's not an accident that competing post-liberal visions will have then competing theological visions: Protestant, Catholic, atheist. This was also true of liberalism, by the way, which was initially a political vision which was against Christendom. It was more inviting of Protestant and atheistic variations. You remember that Locke said we should tolerate Protestants, but not atheists or Catholics. Catholic defenses of political liberalism eventually came, in one sense, out of necessity, because Catholics had to come to some truce with the New World Order. But in my view, Americans should ask both the Ciceronian question, are we still a res publica, and the Christian question, can America be saved? We should ask our messianic question along with the definitional question. What is the America that we want to save? Or in a theological register, what is America that God should save her, or that we should? Okay, my answer. The question, can America be saved, is not hard for a Christian to answer. In God's providence, He permits nations to be born, to rise, to die. And He also allows nations to be born again, as Rome was. We are a long ways from our birth. God blessed America with an abundance of riches, despite our flaws. As Alexis de Tocqueville observed, this was at least in part because Americans lived better than their philosophy. Alexis had tremendous powers of observation, but this was his most Aristotelian, pagan, and Catholic insight. America became great, in Alexis' view, because people still lived in better accord with pre-liberal deposits. The pre-liberal principles were still in place in early America. He said, when Americans did well in this country, they did well precisely because they did not live their philosophy. They did not live liberalism. They lived something different than liberalism. That's interesting. America's exponential post-war growth was indisputably a time in which the American people no longer lived better than their philosophy, but they came instead to all of the logical conclusions of liberalism. Our capital expansion and our global dominance went hand in hand with living liberal principles in our self-determinative and individualist, even onanistic views of sex, marriage, love, and community. What will save America is actually finding better principles to live by, better principles to govern by. The promise of post-liberal politics is just the promise to find these, the promise to find non-liberal principles, which is to say, all the promises bound up with trying to find true principles to live by. And of course, the peril is that we might not find them. The promise of post-liberal politics manifests itself in many cross-aisle ideas about a range of issues, unions, and reindustrializing the country. Rethinking family policy in a politically realistic way, which results in more babies and a homegrown future worth defending. Making our cities truly beautiful and habitable for all, rather than just some Americans. The perils of post-liberal politics are inherent in the fact that it has no constructive content of its own. It's unstable. It's not enough to be post-liberal. I say this as a card-carrying post-liberal. One must unite post-liberal always to some vision of the good, some vision of the happy life. That's what post-liberalism demands. It demands you to make a positive commitment to what you believe the good is. What is the happy life? Not just for the few, but for the many. To the extent that post-liberals privilege only the few and not the many, in their constructive vision and proposals, they'll be no different than the tyrannical liberal, who has failed to bring about an order which is right and just, and which leads people to that happiness our founders pursued. The instability, though, of our own country, the instability of liberalism, is on my mind quite a bit. As a theologian, I think about this, of course, in terms of various historical arguments between Catholics and Protestants. John Henry Newman thought his own Anglicanism was a via media, a middle way between Protestantism and Catholicism. And for that reason, he came to think that Anglicanism, his Anglicanism, was unstable. That one must finally be Protestant or Catholic, he thought. And so he became Catholic. There was, in a sense, no neutrality for him. He recognized that he must be one or the other. Similarly, Alexis de Tocqueville thought that America was, religiously speaking, midway between the pantheism he saw in people like Thomas Jefferson and the rise of the Unitarian Church, and Catholicism. Tocqueville thought America was unstable on some level religiously because it was between those two poles. It was between pantheism and Catholicism. Now, that's a funny juxtaposition, because Unitarianism at that time that Alexis was having this observation was tiny. And Catholicism at that time was also tiny. But how prophetic that now seems. A choice between a pantheistic country and a religious one, a Christian one. Alexis thought America was religiously unstable and finally must be one or the other. America would eventually become, he prophesied, either entirely pantheistic or entirely Catholic. He considered the Protestant vision of the country to be inherently unstable, religiously unstable. And there is a sense in which, when we look around, we see his prophecy come to fruition. We are now radically, religiously unstable. And for this reason, we are a wounded nation. We are in need of religious healing, I would say. We need to choose. America awaits not just a different political philosophy, which will inevitably be worked out over time, just as liberal political philosophy was, but new policies which are ordered not to tyrannizing our neighbors with terrifying demands for interior compliance to their flags or ideologies, woke or otherwise, but which are ordered to the objective goods of human beings, the objective goods of our biology, the objective goods of bearing children, of making families, the objective goods of having the resources which make for good communities. We must actually take seriously the virtues. We need government that works to build up a virtuous people, a religious people, that helps companies make a profit which serves the nation and not just stakeholders. But America awaits a religious fate, I think, in all of these desires. Whether America can be saved is on some level a human question, a question of getting better policies. Certainly we can talk about better policies. But I think religion is still our most ancient and most human question. The question which bubbles up just beneath the surface of all of our debates. We certainly have to ask the Ciceronian question of what are we? Who are we? But also the Augustinian Christian question concerning to whom do we give thanks for our nation? To whom should we pray for help? To whom should we get on our knees? From whence does our salvation come? Certainly our salvation as a nation is an analogous question to the salvation of our souls, and we think principally of that. The happiness of our souls. America can be saved, not precisely in the way that a human soul can be saved, but in a way, the salvation of a country, in theological terms, is when human wills come into some concord with God, some peace with God, some calm about God. We don't have that in America. We're not calm about the reality of God. We're not calm about the question that we could need his help. We're not calm about praying publicly. We're not calm about a need for God and a public recognition of God. Liberalism, in some sense, caused our dis-ease, caused this lack of calm, the lack of tranquility. And liberalism will not help us find a way out of the fragmentation it caused. Its fragmentation is a direct result of a certain kind of rebellion against God, and we experience the decline that comes from it. Post-liberal politics is, at the most basic level, a descriptive fact, and it calls us to seize the opportunities of substance that go with it. We cannot expect too much from post-liberalism. It's a way station, not a make weight. But what I hope for post-liberal politics, what I hope for my friend J.D. Vance on the post-liberal right, as he says, is that post-liberal ideas can help us heal from the false and failed principles that have so harmed us, that have so fragmented us. We should embrace post-liberal politics not as an opportunity for another kind of tyranny or to force a different compliance than our progressive elites do today. Rather, post-liberal politics should inspire in us something heroic, something noble, a vision that the ancients would say was the good life that should raise up everyone, which dignifies rather than cancels, which ennobles the American spirit, not with bootstraps pulled up, but with heavenly standards pulled down. This is what America needs, heavenly standards. This is what can save our families and our countries. I think, of course, the public recognition of God is essential. If a Nietzschean wants to disagree with me, and they will, and they can, that's fine. That's part of the contestation that we are in now. It will will be incumbent upon all of us to ask whether the post-liberal rebellion against God will turn out any better than the liberal rebellion against God. Obviously, I will happily find common cause with all sorts of post-liberals. But on the question of whether America can be saved, I think only the Christian has the right answer. We need heroism to be sure, but we cannot save our nations solely by ourselves, any more than we can save our own soul by ourselves without the help of heaven. While the public recognition of God, who is goodness itself, and upon whom all good things depend, falls short of the desired Christian nationalism of some, and it also falls short of a fully Catholic vision, I think we could do well just to have a minimum political standard that it's okay to ask for God's help in our country. It's not quite like being able to say Merry Christmas again, but it's more like saying we need heavenly help for our country. There's no way of founding and sharing in a common good unless we actually recognize that goodness comes from God and that He gives us a share of it. In other words, what I want to say tonight is that God is necessary to political hope. We simply cannot afford to leave God out of the picture. We're in too much trouble. We cannot relegate God to the realm of private sentiment. We cannot outlaw talk of Christianity. We will not survive long. And indeed, we are not surviving right now if people remain divided over the truth of Christianity. As Senator Vance recently said, he was attracted to Christianity because he saw that it had the power to make him a better husband, a better father, a better citizen. This should also be our view of what Christianity can do for nations. Christianity historically doesn't have a deleterious effect on souls, and it doesn't have a deleterious effect on nations. It helps them. It's something bigger than them. And we very badly need some help. The sooner that we can end our rebellion against Christianity, the sooner we can actually begin building a realistic political future which knows the peace of an order that's not against God. Post-liberal politics can be Protestant or Catholic, and I guess it can be atheist too. But I don't think an atheist post-liberalism can save us. I'm with Alexis de Tocqueville. In the long run, our future lies either with pantheism, from which no hope comes, or from Catholicism, at least from Christianity. One hopes that America can be saved. The other cannot hope that. We cannot predict the future. I have hope for America. But I don't think that we can have any hope for our country